What do an electrocuted elephant, a revenge plot fueled by cheesecake, and a family spat that created Adidas and Puma all have in common? They were all driven by some of the most vicious, petty, and downright dumbest rivalries in human history. We're about to explore 33 feuds where brilliant minds acted like spoiled children, proving that ego, not logic, has always been history's most powerful and destructive engine. 1. The feud between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, known as the War of the Currents, was less a scientific debate and more a masterclass in corporate sabotage and shockingly bad PR. Edison, backing his direct current or DC, saw Tesla's superior alternating current, AC, as a major threat to his empire. So, did he try to innovate and create a better product? Of course not. Instead, he launched a gruesome smear campaign, publicly electrocuting stray dogs, cats, and even an elephant named Topsy with AC electricity to prove how dangerous it was. It was a horrifying spectacle designed to terrify the public. Essentially, one of America's greatest inventors resorted to being a real-life cartoon villain, all because he couldn't stand the thought of a brilliant Serbian immigrant showing him up. 2. This is arguably the most expensive screw you in automotive history. In the early 1960s, Henry Ford II tried to buy Ferrari. After months of negotiations, Enzo Ferrari abruptly pulled out, allegedly telling Ford that he would never work under an ugly factory making ugly cars, and topping it off with a personal insult about him not being his grandfather. That was a big mistake. A furious Ford gave his engineers a blank check and a single, glorious mission: to build a car that would publicly humiliate Enzo Ferrari on his home turf, the 24 Hours of Le Mans race. The result was the legendary Ford GT40, a masterpiece of engineering born entirely out of executive-level rage, which went on to dominate the race for 4 consecutive years, proving that nothing fuels innovation quite like pure, unadulterated spite. 3. You'd think 2 of the greatest artistic minds in human history would have some professional respect for each other. You would be fantastically wrong. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, the titans of the Renaissance, absolutely loathed each other. Their rivalry was an open secret in Florence. Leonardo was dapper, charming, and a celebrated intellectual, while Michelangelo was notoriously grumpy, unkempt, and antisocial. They frequently traded public insults. In one famous encounter, Leonardo, walking with his followers, taunted Michelangelo about his inability to finish a massive bronze horse statue. Michelangelo, never one to back down, fired back, accusing Leonardo of shamefully failing on the very same project years earlier. Their mutual hatred was so intense, it likely pushed them to even greater artistic heights, just to one-up the other guy. 4. Unlike the loud public feuds of other celebrities, the rivalry between Prince and Michael Jackson was a silent, simmering Cold War for the title of King of Pop. The tension was legendary. Michael originally wrote his hit song Bad as a duet for himself and Prince, but Prince walked away, reportedly saying the opening line, "Your butt is mine," would sound ridiculous if he sang it to Michael. The pettiness peaked during a bizarre encounter where Jackson invited Prince to his studio. To assert his dominance, Prince pulled out a ping-pong paddle and challenged MJ to a game. Jackson, who couldn't play, just stood there awkwardly as Prince, a skilled player, slammed the ball around him before declaring, "You see, that's how it's done," and leaving. It was a silent, weird, and utterly iconic power play. 5. The Bone Wars was a feud so bitter and childish it actually set the entire field of American paleontology back by years. In one corner, you had Edward Cope, and in the other, Othniel Marsh, 2 brilliant but monumentally arrogant paleontologists in the late 19th century. Their rivalry went way beyond academic disagreement. They used bribery to get the best fossil sites, hired spies to sabotage each other's digs, and even reportedly ordered their crews to destroy leftover fossils so the other couldn't find them. They were literally destroying priceless scientific knowledge out of pure spite. The most infamous moment was when Cope hastily published a paper on a new marine reptile, the Elasmosaurus, but accidentally put its skull on the tip of its tail. Marsh gleefully and publicly pointed out the error, humiliating cope and fueling a decades-long war of insults and scientific destruction. 6. This was the Hollywood love triangle that shattered the squeaky clean image of 1950s America. Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds weren't just colleagues, they were best friends, America's sweethearts. Then, tragedy struck when Taylor's husband, producer Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. Reynolds' husband, the singer Eddie Fisher, rushed to comfort the grieving widow. That comforting quickly turned into a full-blown scandalous affair. When the news broke, it was an absolute bombshell. Fisher divorced Reynolds to marry Taylor, instantly turning Taylor from a beloved victim into a home-wrecking vamp in the public eye, while Reynolds became the ultimate wronged woman. It was a deeply personal betrayal played out on the world stage, a classic tale of glamour, grief, and guys who can't keep it in their pants. 7. When the Beatles broke up, the official story was a sad but amicable split. The unofficial story was told through their solo albums, where John Lennon and Paul McCartney used their legendary songwriting talents to absolutely savage each other. The passive aggression started with McCartney's album Ram, which featured lyrics Lennon interpreted as personal attacks. John, never one for subtlety, responded with the musical equivalent of a tactical nuke, the song How Do You Sleep? In it, he mercilessly mocked Paul's music, his face, and his contributions to the band with the famously brutal line, "The only thing you done was yesterday." It was a shocking, raw, and incredibly public airing of grievances, turning the world's most beloved creative partnership into a bitter, lyrical fistfight for everyone to hear. 8. This isn't just a corporate rivalry, it's a family feud that literally split a town in half and created two of the biggest sports empires on the planet. In the 1920s, German brothers Adolf and Rudolf Dassler were happily making shoes together in their mother's laundry room. But after a series of bitter arguments during World War II, their relationship completely imploded. They split the company, the assets, and the employees, and set up rival factories on opposite sides of the river in their hometown of Herzogenaurach. Adolf founded Adidas, and Rudolf founded Puma. The town became known as the town of bent necks, because people would look down to see which shoes you were wearing before deciding to talk to you. The brothers never spoke again and are even buried in the same cemetery, as far apart as physically possible. 9. The legendary feud between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs was less a battle of innovation and more a philosophical dispute over the ethics of theft. When Jobs saw Microsoft's early version of Windows, he famously went ballistic, accusing Gates of stealing Apple's graphical user interface. He screamed, "I trusted you, and now you're stealing from us." Gates, in a moment of ice-cold clarity, delivered one of the most devastating comebacks in tech history. He calmly replied, "Well, Steve, I think there's more than one way of looking at it. I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it." It was a stunning admission that, yes, they were both thieves, and it perfectly encapsulates the ruthless, copy and improve culture that built Silicon Valley. 10. Few arguments have ever been as nerdy and as vicious as the one between Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz over who invented calculus. These were two of the most brilliant minds of the 17th century, yet they behaved like furious bloggers in a comment section. When both men published their work around the same time, it ignited an international intellectual firestorm. The English patriotically backed Newton, while continental Europe championed Leibniz, leading to accusations of plagiarism flying across the English Channel. The feud reached its peak of absurdity when the Royal Society in London formed a committee to settle the matter. The president of the Royal Society, who personally appointed the impartial committee and secretly wrote their final report, was none other than Isaac Newton himself. Shockingly, the committee found Newton to be the true inventor. 11. The relationship between Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald is a masterclass in toxic friendship. In the beginning, they were close, two literary giants of the lost generation. But as Fitzgerald's life spiraled downwards due to alcoholism and his wife's mental illness, Hemingway's support curdled into cruel public mockery. The most brutal blow came in Hemingway's memoir, where he recounted a private conversation in which a deeply insecure Fitzgerald worried about the size of his manhood. Hemingway described taking Fitzgerald to a museum to compare his anatomy to the classical statues. A deeply humiliating and personal moment he then published for the entire world to read. It was a stunning betrayal, cementing Hemingway's reputation as both a brilliant writer and a world-class jerk who kicked his friends when they were down. 12. The rivalry between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great was the ultimate political breakup, a clash of two colossal egos that brought the Roman Republic to its knees. They were once allies in the First Triumvirate, a three-man dictatorship that basically ran the known world. But after the third member, Crassus, died, there was no one left to mediate between the two biggest alpha dogs in Rome. The Senate, fearing Caesar's popularity and ambition, sided with Pompey and ordered Caesar to disband his army. Caesar's response was to march his legions across the Rubicon River, an act of open treason that triggered a full-scale civil war. It was a feud that proved the old saying, "A republic simply isn't big enough for two men who both believe they are destined to be number one." 13. The feud between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr was a slow-burn political train wreck that spanned over a decade and ended in the dumbest, most formal way possible, a duel. It wasn't one single issue but a long series of political and personal slights. Hamilton consistently blocked Burr's political ambitions, viewing him as an unprincipled opportunist. The final straw was ridiculously petty. Hamilton was reported to have called Burr a dangerous man and expressed a despicable opinion of him during a dinner party. Burr demanded a formal apology. Hamilton, full of pride, refused. And so, the sitting Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, and the former Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, rode to a secluded spot in New Jersey and shot at each other, proving that even the most brilliant founding fathers were not above settling their differences like hot-headed idiots. 14. The feud between Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Antonio Salieri has become the stuff of legend, mostly thanks to the movie Amadeus. The reality was less about poison and more about professional jealousy. Salieri was the respected, hard-working, and politically savvy court composer in Vienna. Then along came Mozart, a giggling, foul-mouthed prodigy who could seemingly pull divine masterpieces out of thin air with zero effort. While they were professional rivals, there's no real evidence Salieri hated Mozart, let alone plotted his demise. But the legend persists because it's so relatable. It's the story of every talented, hardworking person who has had to watch in quiet agony as a true, effortless genius waltzes in and makes it all look easy. Salieri became the patron saint of the very, very good in a world that only remembers the great. 15. The rivalry between Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse was arguably the most creatively productive feud in history. For decades, these two giants of 20th century art were locked in a relentless artistic battle, a friendship fueled by intense competition. They were obsessed with each other's work. One would unveil a new painting, and the other would immediately retreat to his studio to create a response, an answer, a rebuttal on canvas. They would visit each other's studios, trade backhanded compliments, and silently absorb what the other was doing, all in an effort to destroy them with their next piece. It was a rivalry so intense that it pushed both of them to constantly reinvent themselves, and in doing so, they fundamentally changed the course of modern art forever. They didn't just want to be the best, they wanted to be better than each other. 16. In the world of the samurai, there is no duel more legendary than the one between Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro. It was a showdown of epic proportions on a remote island. Kojiro was the master, famed for his impossibly long sword and his signature swallow cut technique. Musashi, on the other hand, was the undefeated, unorthodox brawler. On the day of the duel, Musashi committed the ultimate power move. He showed up 3 hours late, deliberately enraging his opponent. To make matters worse, he hadn't even brought a proper sword. On the boat ride over, he had casually carved a crude wooden sword from a spare oar. It was longer than Kojiro's blade, and a massive insult. The enraged Kojiro struck first, but Musashi, with his makeshift weapon and ice-cold strategy, dodged and delivered a single fatal blow to the head, ending the greatest swordsman of the era with a piece of wood. 17. On the set of the musical Guys and Dolls, two of the biggest egos in Hollywood collided with spectacular results. In one corner was Frank Sinatra, a legendary singer and consummate professional who expected everyone to nail their lines on the first take. In the other was Marlon Brando, the mumbling father of method acting who couldn't carry a tune in a bucket and treated each take as a new journey of discovery. Sinatra's frustration quickly turned into psychological warfare. During a scene where Brando's character had to eat cheesecake, Sinatra, knowing Brando hated sweets, quietly told the director to keep rolling. Take after take, Brando, the method actor, had to force down slice after slice of cheesecake until he was physically ill. It was Sinatra's petty, silent, and frankly brilliant revenge for Brando's artistic process. 18. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were the ultimate political frenemies. They started as brothers of the Revolution, working side by side to found a nation. But once the country was established, their friendship imploded over political differences. What followed was one of the dirtiest political campaigns in history, fought through anonymous newspaper articles and pamphlets. It was the 18th century equivalent of creating burner accounts to trash talk your ex-best friend. Adams's camp called Jefferson a godless atheist and a coward, while Jefferson's allies painted Adams as a rage-filled monarchist who wanted to be king. They spent years absolutely savaging each other's reputations, only to miraculously reconcile in their old age and, in a final twist of historical poetry, die on the exact same day, July 4th, 50 years after signing the Declaration of Independence. 19. The American Revolution was a glorious cause for Benjamin Franklin, but it utterly destroyed his family. His feud with his illegitimate son, William, was a tragic clash of loyalty. While Ben became a leading voice for independence, William, the royal governor of New Jersey, remained a staunch loyalist, loyal to the king. The war didn't just put them on opposite sides, it turned them into bitter enemies. William was arrested and imprisoned by the Patriots, and Ben did absolutely nothing to help him. After the war, William tried to reconcile, but his father was merciless, essentially disowning him for his betrayal. In a final, heartbreaking letter, Ben wrote that they could only resume their relationship if William first paid back all the debts he owed him. It was a brutal end to a relationship, torn apart by the birth of a nation. 20. The feud between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin during the Third Crusade is one of the weirdest in history because it was defined by an almost unbelievable level of mutual respect. These were two mortal enemies, leading opposing armies in a bloody holy war, yet they acted like members of a very exclusive, very violent chivalry club. At one point, Richard fell gravely ill with a fever. Upon hearing this, Saladin didn't celebrate. Instead, he sent his personal physician to treat his enemy, along with fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to cool him down. On another occasion, when Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin sent him 2 fresh mounts, saying a king should not have to fight on foot. It was a bizarre and honorable rivalry where both men were trying to kill each other, but only in the most gentlemanly way possible. 21. The fallout between King Henry II of England and Thomas Becket is a classic story of a plan backfiring spectacularly. They were best friends, the king and his chancellor, known for their wild parties and political scheming. So, when the position of Archbishop of Canterbury opened up, Henry thought, "Perfect, I'll give it to my drinking buddy, and he'll do whatever I say." It was a monumental miscalculation. The moment Becket put on the robes, he underwent a complete transformation, becoming a devout and stubborn defender of the church's power against the king's. The feud escalated until an exasperated Henry famously screamed, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 of his knights took that as a royal command, rode to Canterbury Cathedral, and brutally murdered Becket on the altar steps, turning Henry's former best friend into a martyr and creating a PR nightmare for the crown. 22. The rivalry between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev wasn't about land, money, or honor. It was a 13-day global staring contest where the loser would trigger the apocalypse. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, these two men held the fate of every single person on Earth in their hands. Khrushchev had secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, right on America's doorstep. Kennedy responded with a naval blockade, bringing the two superpowers to the absolute brink of nuclear war. It was the ultimate Cold War feud, a terrifyingly high-stakes game of chicken played by two men with opposing ideologies and access to thousands of world-ending weapons. Every tense negotiation, every military maneuver, pushed humanity closer to the edge, making it the most terrifyingly high-stakes personal conflict in human history. 23. Joseph Stalin's feud with Leon Trotsky is a terrifying case study in obsessive, long-distance vengeance. After Lenin died, the two men vied for control of the Soviet Union. Stalin, the master of bureaucracy and backroom deals, won, and Trotsky was exiled. For any normal leader, that would be the end of it. But Stalin was not a normal leader. He was pathologically paranoid and couldn't stand the thought of his intellectual rival being alive anywhere. He launched a decade-long international manhunt, pursuing Trotsky from Turkey to France to Norway. The chase finally ended in 1940 in Mexico City, where a Stalinist agent, posing as a follower, gained Trotsky's trust and then brutally murdered him by burying an ice axe in his skull. It was a vicious, personal, and horrifyingly successful mission to silence a critic. 24. The showdown between President Harry S. Truman and General Douglas MacArthur was a battle over who actually runs the country: the elected official or the five-star general with an ego the size of a continent. During the Korean War, MacArthur wasn't just a general. He was a national hero, treated like a living god. He also completely disagreed with Truman's strategy of a limited war. MacArthur publicly and repeatedly undermined the president, demanding they invade China and use nuclear weapons to win at all costs. He was openly defying the very principle of civilian control over the military. Truman was forced to make one of the bravest and most unpopular decisions in presidential history. He fired a deity. He fired General MacArthur to prevent World War III, asserting once and for all that in America, the buck stops in the Oval Office, not at a general's headquarters. 25. Most bad marriages end in divorce. Catherine the Great's ended in a military coup. Her husband, Tsar Peter III of Russia, was not just a bad ruler. He was a world-class man-child. He was famously obsessed with playing with toy soldiers, even staging a formal court-martial and execution by hanging of a rat he caught illegally chewing one of his starch flower sentries. Worse, he idolized Russia's arch-enemy, the King of Prussia, and immediately gave back all the territory Russia had just won in a bloody war. After 6 months of this national embarrassment, Catherine decided she'd had enough. Backed by the military and the clergy, she overthrew her comically incompetent husband in a swift, bloodless coup, proving that sometimes the most effective solution to a marital problem is becoming an all-powerful autocrat. 26. Most presidents fight political opponents or foreign powers. Andrew Jackson declared a full-scale war on a building. He had a deep, personal, and borderline unhinged hatred for the Second Bank of the United States. He saw it as a corrupt, elitist monster, a hydra-headed beast that concentrated wealth and power in the hands of a few. This wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was a vendetta. He spent his entire presidency on a mission to destroy it. When the bank's charter was up for renewal, he vetoed it with a message so fiery it was basically a declaration of war. Then, he ordered all federal funds to be withdrawn from it, bleeding it dry. He successfully killed the bank, an act he considered his greatest achievement, even though many economists argue it triggered a massive financial panic a few years later. 27. If you've ever read The Three Musketeers and thought the drama was over the top, the real-life feud it was based on was even more intense. The conflict between Cardinal Richelieu, the all-powerful and deeply paranoid First Minister of France, and Queen Anne, the Spanish-born wife of King Louis XIII, was a masterclass in courtly espionage. Richelieu was convinced Anne was secretly conspiring with her relatives in Spain, France's greatest enemy. He subjected her to constant surveillance, read her mail, and tried to undermine her at every turn. The most famous incident, the Affair of the Diamond Studs, was a real plot by Richelieu to expose the Queen's supposed affair with an English duke and disgrace her publicly. It was a relentless, high-stakes chess match for influence over the king, filled with spies, intrigue, and political backstabbing. 28. The French Revolution had a simple, terrifying career path. Revolutionary hero one day, guillotine fodder the next. The feud between Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton perfectly illustrates this. They were once allies, two of the leading voices of the revolution. Danton was the boisterous, life-loving man of the people, while Robespierre was the cold, incorruptible ideologue. But as Robespierre's reign of terror escalated, sending thousands to their deaths, Danton grew weary of the bloodshed and called for moderation. To the paranoid Robespierre, a call for moderation was the same as a call for treason. He used his immense power in the Committee of Public Safety to have Danton and his followers arrested and sent to the guillotine. Danton's reported last words were a chilling prophecy. "Robespierre, you will follow me." He was right. Less than 4 months later, Robespierre met the same fate. 29. What do you do when the most powerful religious leader in the world denies your request? If you're King Henry VIII, you don't just write a strongly worded letter. You perform a national rage quit from the entire Catholic Church. Henry was desperate for a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, convinced she could not produce a male heir. When the Pope refused to grant the annulment, Henry didn't just find a workaround, he triggered a theological earthquake. He passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself the supreme head of a new Church of England, effectively firing the Pope. This allowed him to grant his own divorce, marry Anne Boleyn, and, as a bonus, dissolve all the monasteries and seize their immense wealth. It was one of the most profound ruptures in Western history, all driven by one man's succession anxiety and colossal ego. 30. J. Robert Oppenheimer may have been the father of the atomic bomb, but his most devastating battle was fought against a petty bureaucrat with a bruised ego. That bureaucrat was Louis Strauss, the powerful chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission. The feud's origin was almost comical. During a public hearing years earlier, Oppenheimer had made a clever remark at Strauss's expense, leading to laughter in the room. Strauss, a deeply insecure man, never forgave the slight. Years later, he used his position to orchestrate Oppenheimer's downfall, initiating a security clearance hearing designed to be a show trial. He used Oppenheimer's past leftist associations and his moral qualms about the hydrogen bomb to paint him as a disloyal security risk, successfully stripping the national hero of his clearance and publicly humiliating him. It was a masterfully vindictive character assassination fueled by years of simmering resentment. 31. In 1972, the entire Cold War, with all its ideological tension and nuclear paranoia, was channeled onto a chessboard in Iceland. The match between the American eccentric Bobby Fischer and the Soviet champion Boris Spassky was far more than a game. Spassky was the unflappable product of the dominant Soviet chess machine. Fischer was a lone, volatile genius. Before and during the match, Fischer waged a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. He complained about the chairs, the lighting, the cameras, the audience noise, and even forfeited Game 2 in a fit of rage. What seemed like the tantrums of a prima donna was actually a brilliant strategy that completely unnerved the Soviets, who were used to orderly, predictable opponents. Fischer's chaotic energy, combined with his breathtakingly brilliant play, shattered Spassky's concentration and won a monumental symbolic victory for the West. 32. Forget sibling rivalry. The feud between Mary, Queen of Scots, and Queen Elizabeth I was a cousin rivalry that defined an era. This was a family drama where the inheritance wasn't just a house but the throne of England. As a Catholic with a strong claim to the English crown, Mary was a permanent threat to the Protestant Elizabeth. After a disastrous reign in Scotland forced Mary to flee, she sought refuge with her cousin in England. It was a fatal mistake. Elizabeth, paralyzed by paranoia, saw Mary not as family, but as a living magnet for Catholic plots against her. She placed Mary under house arrest for nearly 19 years. It was a long, slow-motion tragedy, a cold war of spycraft and suspicion that ended only when Elizabeth's spymaster finally entrapped Mary in a plot, forcing Elizabeth to sign her own cousin's death warrant. 33. The showdown between Al Capone and Eliot Ness was the real-life battle that defined the entire gangster genre. On one side, you had public enemy number one, a charismatic and unbelievably violent mob boss who ran Chicago like his personal kingdom with politicians and police on his payroll. He was untouchable. On the other side was Eliot Ness and his small, hand-picked squad of federal agents. They became famous as the Untouchables for a simple and, at the time, revolutionary reason: they couldn't be bribed. While Ness's team famously disrupted Capone's empire with high-profile raids, the final takedown in this epic gangland war wasn't a hail of bullets. It was the most gloriously anticlimactic ending imaginable. The most feared man in America, responsible for countless murders, was finally sent to prison for a crime as boring as dirt: tax evasion. After all that, the king of the underworld was defeated by an accountant. So, the lesson is clear. Progress and pettiness have always gone hand in hand, but a list of 33 can never be complete. We know there are legendary feuds we didn't mention. So, which vicious rivalry are you furious we overlooked? What's the one story of epic pettiness that absolutely needs to be on this list? Unleash it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this celebration of historical spite, show your support with a like and subscribe for more.